Working the graveyard shift at the old Ambrose Hotel had always fit me like a well-worn glove. After midnight, the world slowed down, the buzz of the day fading to a comfortable murmur, and with fewer guests milling about, the place seemed almost serene. It was as if, for those quiet hours, the sprawling Ambrose was mine alone. Or at least, it used to feel that way. I'd been here close to 2 years, enough time to memorize its quirks and rhythms. But if you asked me when exactly things started feeling off, I couldn't give you a precise answer. The Ambrose was a remnant from another era, built back in the Roaring Twenties. Its design was a curious mix of Victorian grandeur and outdated luxury, polished marble floors, brass railings, and chandeliers that, while faded, still flickered with a certain elegance. The hotel felt frozen in time, with whispers of both its glamorous past and its present wear. Standing behind the front desk, I sipped coffee under the soft glow of the lobby lights, casting long shadows across the tiled floor. It was nearing midnight, and the hotel had settled into its usual late-night lull. A few guests were scattered around, a businessman in a hurry to catch an elevator, an elderly couple chatting in hushed tones near the fireplace. My job was to keep everything running smoothly, a task I'd grown so accustomed to that it barely required thought. As I leaned back and let my gaze drift across the dim lobby, my mind wandered. The night shift had a rhythm all its own, one that I found oddly comforting. Sure, there were always strange requests, a guest demanding an extra blanket at 3 a.m. or a broken key card at the worst times, but nothing ever really fazed me. The quiet suited me, it gave me space to think. That night, though, my thoughts drifted to the strange conversation I'd had with Dana earlier. She was the head of housekeeping, a no-nonsense woman who had worked here long before I arrived. Dana had a habit of brushing off oddities with a shrug and her usual line, "Old buildings have their quirks." But what I'd brought up last week had been different. "Dana," I'd asked one night while she was making her rounds, "have you ever noticed anything unusual about the 8th floor?" I'd meant it as a casual question, but she'd paused, her brow furrowing slightly before she let out a short, uneasy laugh. "Not you too," she'd said, a hint of nerves creeping into her voice. "That floor's closed off for renovations. No one's up there, Sam. If you're hearing anything strange, it's probably just the old pipes." The thing was, it wasn't just the usual noises or cold drafts that had caught my attention. Some nights, it felt like the floor wasn't merely closed, it was gone. The first time I noticed, I'd been going through the usual motions, checking the hotel system, arranging key cards, handling late check-ins, when I saw that the 8th floor was missing from the directory entirely. Not even labeled as closed for repairs. It was as if it had vanished. At first, I shrugged it off. But the next night, it reappeared, only to disappear again a few nights later. Dana's explanation seemed too simple. I hadn't seen any official notes about renovations, nor had anyone mentioned relocating guests. And yet, there it was, one moment on the system, the next gone. A sudden tap on the counter pulled me out of my thoughts. I looked up to find Leo, the day manager, standing in front of me, his expression as serious as always. Leo wasn't one for chit-chat, and while we got along fine, he always seemed to view the night shift with a hint of disdain. "Everything running smoothly, Sam?" he asked, eyeing my coffee cup. "Same as always," I replied, offering a quick nod. "Nothing out of the ordinary." Leo gave a grunt of acknowledgement, casting a long glance around the quiet lobby before turning back to me. "I've been hearing from some of the staff that you've been asking about the 8th floor." His tone was light, but I sensed a warning in it. "I was just curious," I said, keeping my voice steady. "One night it's in the system, and the next it's gone. I thought maybe it was a maintenance thing." "Don't overthink it, Sam." Leo's gaze hardened. "The 8th floor is off-limits for a reason. If you see anything strange or notice any glitches, ignore them. The place is ancient, sometimes it does strange things." Before I could respond, he turned and walked briskly back toward the staff door, leaving me with the uneasy feeling that something was being kept from me. As the night dragged on, that sense of unease gnawed at me. I'd seen the floor disappear. I'd even received strange, static-filled calls from empty rooms on that floor. This wasn't just a glitch. When 2 a.m. rolled around and the last of the guests retired to their rooms, the lobby fell into a heavy silence. I was alone again, and the urge to check the system tugged at me. Curiosity won out. I pulled up the directory, scrolling to the floor list. My heart sank as I reached it. The 8th floor had vanished again. Not under repair. Not unavailable. Just gone. I glanced at the elevator panel from my desk, and sure enough, the button for the 8th floor was missing too, replaced by a blank space. My stomach tightened. Maybe Leo was right, maybe it was a glitch. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to see it with my own eyes. I grabbed my key card and headed toward the elevator, my pulse quickening with a mix of fear and excitement. The hum of the elevator usually felt calming, but tonight, it only heightened my nerves. Between the buttons for the 7th and 9th floors, there was only an empty spot where the 8th should be. I pressed the button for the 7th floor, deciding I could try the stairwell from there. The elevator moved slowly, almost reluctantly, each floor lighting up one by one. When the doors finally opened with a soft chime, I stepped out onto the dimly lit hallway. The air was cool, and the lights flickered ever so slightly. I made my way toward the stairwell, a prickling sensation creeping up my spine as if someone were watching. Pushing open the stairwell door, I found the stairs cast in shadows, lit only by weak emergency lights. As I climbed toward the landing between the 7th and 8th floors, the temperature dropped sharply. I could see my breath in the air, and the sign that should have read 8th floor was blank. I opened the stairwell door and stepped into what should have been the 8th floor. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, and the hallway stretched out in eerie silence. No hum of the air conditioning, no distant murmurs, just an unsettling quiet. Then, from somewhere down the hall, I heard it, the faint sound of children's laughter, high-pitched and echoing. My heart thudded, and I glanced over my shoulder, but the hallway behind me was empty. I knew the floor was supposed to be vacant, yet the laughter persisted, drifting down the hall. I took a hesitant step forward, drawn by the haunting sound. Some doors along the hallway were slightly ajar, the rooms beyond dark and impenetrable. The floor felt abandoned, but it was as though an unseen presence lurked just out of sight. I stopped in front of room 814. The door was cracked open, a faint glow spilling into the hallway. This was the same room I'd received that strange call from earlier. I pushed the door open slowly, the hinges creaking. Inside, the room was a mess. The bed was unmade, lamps were knocked over, and curtains half-drawn. It looked like someone had left in a hurry, though there were no signs of a struggle, just an unsettling stillness. A damp, musty smell clung to the air, and my eyes were drawn to the bathroom mirror. There, scrawled in dripping red letters, were the words, "Leave. Now." I froze, my breath catching as a wave of nausea hit me. The letters looked fresh, still trailing down the mirror. My hand reached out, fingers trembling as I touched the glass. The substance was sticky, and real. This wasn't some prank. Suddenly, a loud bang behind me jolted me back to reality. I spun around to find the door had slammed shut, sealing me in. The words on the mirror, "You're next," echoed in my mind like a warning bell, each letter dripping with a sinister purpose. My heart raced, each beat louder than the last, urging me to leave before whatever lurked on the 6th floor showed itself. Backing away from the room, I glanced down the hallway, searching for any sign of movement, any flicker of light that might betray another presence. But all I found was silence, a stillness so deep it felt alive, as though the hotel itself were holding its breath. Just as I turned to head back to the elevator, I saw them. At the far end of the corridor, 4 or 5 figures stood motionless, their faces shadowed and expressions unreadable. At first, I thought they were fellow staff, possibly the night cleaners. But the details didn't add up. Their uniforms were outdated, the style and cut more suited to another era, as if they'd stepped out of an old black and white photograph. They stared straight at me, but their eyes were blank, unfocused. Something was terribly wrong. I took a step back, then another, unable to tear my gaze away. One of them tilted their head in an unnatural, bird-like movement, as if assessing me. My breathing hitched, and I had to fight the urge to look away. It was as if they could sense my fear, drawn to it like moths to a flame. Who are you?" I whispered, though my voice barely carried through the heavy silence. But they made no move to respond. They stood there, watching with a silent, unnerving patience. Without breaking my gaze, I reached behind me, feeling blindly along the wall until my fingers brushed the cold, smooth metal of the stairwell door. With a jolt, I threw myself through it, slamming the door shut as the lock clicked into place. My pulse thundered in my ears, but the silence on the other side of the door was as thick as ever. I didn't wait to see if they would follow. I took the stairs two at a time, the echo of my footsteps bouncing through the narrow, dimly lit space. When I finally reached the lobby floor, I threw open the door and practically sprinted to the front desk, my heart pounding. The empty lobby felt eerily calm, but I knew what I'd seen, and the fear still clung to me. Back behind the front desk, I slumped into my chair, breathless. The familiar glow of the security monitors brought a small, fleeting comfort, though I was already dreading what I might see on them. I scanned the screens, but every floor appeared quiet, empty. I half expected the sixth floor to be there again, taunting me, but it was gone from the directory, as though the hotel itself wanted me to forget. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples. What was happening here? Each night seemed to pull me deeper into this mystery, as if the sixth floor held secrets that didn't want to stay hidden. It wasn't just the eerie figures, or the messages scrawled on mirrors, it was the strange complaints from guests, too. A pattern I'd almost missed until now. In the nights that followed, more guests started reporting unsettling experiences. A businessman approached me one evening, pale and visibly shaken, his suit rumpled and his hands unsteady as he handed over his keycard. "I need to check out," he said, his voice strained. "Is there a problem with your room, sir?" I asked, though his expression told me all I needed to know. "Yeah. Something's wrong. I keep losing time, hours at a stretch. I went to sleep at midnight, and the next thing I knew, it was morning. But I didn't sleep. I was just gone. Gone." I echoed, a chill running down my spine. He glanced around as though afraid of being overheard. "It sounds insane, but I think I lost part of myself. I just need to leave." I watched him hurry out of the lobby, disappearing into the quiet night. But the stories kept coming. A woman in her 60s, who had been assigned a room on the 5th floor, came to the desk early one morning, her face etched with exhaustion. "I'm sorry," she began, hesitating as she met my gaze. "I need to change rooms." "Of course, ma'am. Was there something wrong with your room?" She nodded, her eyes dark with something close to fear. "I don't know how to explain it, but there's something in the walls." I could hear voices, laughter, and when I woke up, I swear someone was standing at the foot of my bed. But when I turned on the light, there was no one there. I tried to reassure her, but her eyes lingered on the ceiling, as though she could sense something watching from above. When I offered to move her to the 3rd floor, she nodded gratefully, saying only, "As far from the 6th floor as possible, please." I couldn't ignore it anymore. It was as if the 6th floor had seeped into every part of the building, affecting everyone it could reach. And every night, without fail, I found myself glancing toward the elevator, half expecting the 6th floor button to appear. Finally, one night, the urge became too strong to resist. I needed answers. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being pulled toward something that had waited in the dark for far too long. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed my keycard and walked toward the elevator, feeling an odd mix of fear and anticipation. The 6th floor button glowed faintly as I pressed it. The doors slid shut, and the elevator hummed as it climbed. I felt my stomach twist with dread, but I was determined not to turn back. When the elevator finally stopped, the doors opened with a soft chime, revealing the dark, silent hallway beyond. Stepping out, I immediately noticed how cold the air was, and how the silence seemed to press down on me. The hallway stretched out before me, lined with darkened rooms, their doors slightly ajar as though inviting me in. I hesitated, listening, but the silence was absolute. Then I heard it, a faint whisper, drifting through the hallway like a breath of wind. "Come back, don't leave." My heart skipped a beat as I turned, searching for the source, but there was no one there. I moved cautiously down the hallway, drawn toward room 6116, the room where I'd seen the message on the mirror. The door stood ajar, and as I stepped inside, a wave of cold washed over me. The room looked the same as before, its bed unmade, the curtains drawn, but this time, the mirror was clear. Just as I was beginning to think it had all been in my head, the bathroom door creaked open, and my breath caught. In the mirror, the words had reappeared in the same jagged red scrawl, "Get out while you can." A chill ran down my spine as I took a step back, my pulse pounding in my ears. But before I could turn, the door behind me swung shut with a heavy, echoing thud. Panic flooded through me as I rattled the handle, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. The air grew colder, and the oppressive silence seemed to close in around me. I felt a presence behind me, something dark and ancient, watching with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I turned slowly, afraid of what I might see, but the room was empty. Yet I could feel it, looming, just beyond sight. And in that moment, I knew, I'd found the secret of the 6th floor, the darkness that lingered in its walls. It was watching, waiting, and it wasn't about to let me leave. With a final, desperate push, I slammed my shoulder against the door, and it flew open. I stumbled into the hallway, gasping for breath, my heart hammering as I raced to the elevator. As I stepped inside and pressed the lobby button, I heard that faint, mocking whisper again, drifting down the hall. "Come back, you belong here." The doors slid shut, cutting off the sound, and I leaned against the wall, trembling. As the elevator descended, I closed my eyes, forcing myself to breathe, but I knew I would never forget what I'd seen on the 6th floor. Back in the lobby, I collapsed into my chair, staring blankly at the security monitor. The directory was back to normal, the 6th floor gone once more, like it had never existed. But I knew better. The 6th floor was waiting, always watching, and someday, it would call me back. I took a hesitant step closer, hoping that maybe these strange figures could somehow explain what was happening. But the moment I looked more closely, dread rooted me in place. The staff wore uniforms from a bygone era, bellhops in red jackets adorned with brass buttons, maids in stiff black and white dresses, and a front desk clerk in a high-collared suit. All of them were perfectly still, their backs turned, as if waiting for something invisible. I opened my mouth to call out, but the words caught in my throat as I realized something was horribly wrong. Their movements weren't natural. They swayed ever so slightly, tilting their heads in stiff, robotic motions like puppets on strings. A chill crept down my spine, and I felt the hairs on my neck rise as I watched, transfixed in growing horror. Slowly, they began to turn, each movement jerky and unnatural. I took an instinctive step back, my heart pounding as their faces came into view. They had no faces, just smooth, blank skin where eyes and mouths should have been. They stared, if you could call it that, with those blank, empty faces, motionless and haunting. The air grew colder, pressing down on my chest, and every instinct screamed at me to run. But as I backed away, it felt like my feet were sinking, weighted as though I were wading through some invisible, thick mud. "Hello?" I croaked out in a whisper, desperate but met with nothing. The faceless figures remained still, heads slightly tilted as if waiting. Then, all at once, they turned and walked, stiffly and in unison, toward a room at the end of the hall, room 616. The door swung open, and one by one, they disappeared into the darkness beyond. Compelled by some blend of horror and morbid curiosity, I found myself moving toward room 616. As I reached the doorway, I hesitated. Shadows danced inside, and faint whispers drifted out, their words indistinguishable yet undeniably ominous. With a shaking hand, I pushed the door open, peering inside. The room was empty, bare of any furniture or sign of life. Just an eerie silence, save for a single piece of yellowed paper lying on the bed. My hand trembled as I picked it up, eyes straining to make out the smudged writing in the dim light. "We're still working." Heart racing, I stumbled back, horrified. I had seen enough. I didn't care what anyone else might say, something was dreadfully, terribly wrong with this hotel, and the source of it all was right here on the 6th floor. The staff I'd seen weren't real or, at least, weren't anymore. They were relics, echoes of the past caught in some twisted loop. I had to leave before I, too, was drawn into whatever dark hold this place had. I bolted for the elevator, my footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. But when I reached the doors and pressed the button, nothing happened. The button for the 6th floor had gone dark. Panic gripped me as I turned to the stairwell, desperate to escape. But when I pushed the door open, my heart sank. Instead of stairs, another hallway stretched before me, identical to the one I'd just come from. No matter which direction I turned, every path led to another endless corridor. Flickering lights, thick carpet, stifling silence, it was like the hotel was shifting around me, trapping me in an unending labyrinth. I walked, hoping that eventually I would find my way out, but each hallway stretched on forever. Every time an exit sign flickered at the far end, it vanished before I could reach it, mocking me with an endless loop of false hope. Finally, after what felt like hours, I saw it, a door marked "Staff Only." I rushed to it, twisting the handle, and stumbled through. Expecting a stairwell or lobby, I found myself standing back in front of the front desk, the lobby as silent and empty as when I'd last seen it. Had I imagined it all? The faceless staff, the endless hallways, the ominous messages, it all seemed surreal, a half-remembered nightmare. But then I saw something on the security monitor that made my blood freeze. The camera feed for the 6th floor flickered, and there they were, the staff, standing motionless, their blank faces turned directly toward the camera as if watching me. I staggered back from the screen, hands trembling. I couldn't sleep after that night. The memories of the 6th floor haunted me. Every glance in a mirror showed shadows moving in ways they shouldn't, reflections that felt wrong, as if someone, or something, was watching from within. The nightmares followed, too. I was always back in that twisting hallway, running from a faceless horror just beyond sight. Each time, I'd wake drenched in cold sweat, the terror lingering long after waking. Back on my next shift, I found myself obsessively watching the security monitors, the 6th floor foremost on my mind. The screen showed nothing but an empty corridor, its lights flickering occasionally. Then, at 2 a.m., the phone rang. My stomach tightened as I picked up the receiver. "Front desk, this is Mark," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. A faint crackling on the line, then a voice, distorted, barely audible. "Room 621. My breath caught. I checked the system, room 621 was unoccupied. Swallowing my unease, I took my keycard and headed toward the elevator. The ride was tense, each hum of the machinery heightening my anxiety. When I reached the 6th floor, the familiar, oppressive atmosphere greeted me, heavier than ever. Room 621 stood at the end of the hall. Even from a distance, I could feel a palpable darkness seeping through its walls. When I entered, the room was dark, cold, and utterly silent. As my eyes adjusted, I noticed the room was missing one thing every other room had: mirrors. There wasn't a single reflective surface, as though something didn't want me to see what was here. In the dim glow from the hallway, I saw a shadow behind me in the television's glossy black screen. Tall, dark, and looming, it stood there, motionless yet menacing. I whipped around, but nothing was there. Heart pounding, I staggered back to the door, only to find it locked, as if the room itself refused to let me go. I don't know how long I was trapped, the darkness pressing in until, finally, the door reappeared, and I stumbled back into the hallway. After that, I couldn't stay. I resigned the next day, packed my things, and left. Even now, weeks later, the nightmares continue. Sometimes, when I catch my reflection, something lingers in the glass, a shadow watching, waiting.